Joining me now, I'm glad to say, is Conservative MP Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown, who joins us. Good afternoon to you.
Hello, Julia. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm not going to ask you what you thought of the Prime Minister's speech, because you're probably going to say, oh, it was wonderful, he's going to lead us into the next election. Let's blah, blah, blah through that and go straight to the key issue I'm asking today. What has gone wrong with our politics?
Well, I think as Rishi has said in his really good speech yesterday, we've had this sort of consensus politics for the last 30 years, all about announcements, as your previous correspondent said, but actually not enough delivery. Here we've got yesterday a Prime Minister with plenty of new ideas. If you want change, he said, stick with him and the Conservatives, and a host of new ideas, and we'll see whether he's able to implement them. But he's set the ground rules, I think, by cancelling HS2, for example, and coming up with all these alternative schemes. Good announcement in education, good announcement in the health service, good announcement on the boats. I mean, there was a ton of stuff in that speech yesterday.
Was there? I mean, I thought it was a pretty thin speech as they went. A lot of the things we already knew already. I mean, we were able to prepare in the show for none of those announcements. They weren't new things. I mean, certainly, A-levels, is that a host announcements? I mean, a lot of people are going to be going, it's not going to happen realistically, it could not happen even if he did win the next general election under the next term in office. I think a lot of people are saying if those are the big ideas that the Tories have right now, then you're out of big ideas.
Well, I don't agree with you. I actually think that setting a long-term future of education for our children, actually making our A-level education less narrow, mixing the academic with the technical, I think is a really good idea, equipping our children for the 21st century.
You're honestly on the show telling me, Sir Geoffrey, that when people are, in their homes and in the workplaces and in the pubs, people are talking incessantly about, A, where HS2 should go, and, do you know what we need to do? Well, we need to change the A-level system and, make sure that, women patients aren't with, male patients in hospital wards. Now, these things are important, but I'm not sure that quite gets to the nub of the issue for most people who right now are just saying, the country ain't working. We're broken. We're in massive debt. We've got the highest taxes for 70 years, and yet none of our public services actually works at a reasonable level. People are crying out for a big fix to a big problem. This is just tinkering around the edges.
Well, I simply don't agree. I think some of those announcements yesterday on the health service, on education, on stopping the boats, these are the things that really matter to people, the things I find out on the doorsteps. And I think you'll find here is a Prime Minister that's looked at all these issues very, very carefully, worked out how he can implement them. And I actually think there was a lot of substance in that speech yesterday. I think you can dismiss it if you like, but actually teenage children's health, stopping smoking, I'd have thought was one of the most important things you could possibly do.
Yeah, that's an interesting measure, isn't it? Because he was defending that measure, saying, look, he's not a nanny statist, his instinct is personal freedom, and yet going ahead with that. But as he pointed out, and it's difficult for me, I hate smoking, but I've become rather more libertarian on this issue than I used to be. As quite a nanny statist and smoker on the basis that, how many more things are we going to stop people doing? But then I don't know anyone who wants their child to smoke, as he pointed out in the speech. So that's probably going to be a pretty popular move. But you do understand the difficulty of, in 20 years' time, a 35-year-old and a 36-year-old going to the shop at the same time, and the 36-year-old can buy cigarettes and the 35-year-old can't because it's illegal. I mean, that's a nonsense.
Julia, I've been about in politics for a long time. I remember before I became a member of Parliament, agonising over whether we should have a seatbelt law or not. I think nobody would now want to go back to a situation where there were no seatbelts, and it saved a considerable amount of lives and injuries. And I think we'll say the same thing in 20 years' time about smoking. It is obviously one of the most damaging things you can do for your health. And I think that was a good measure, and I will be voting for it in Parliament.
Yeah. OK, and it's a free vote, isn't it?
It is a free vote, yes.
In terms of what is focusing a lot of MPs' minds, which is the next general election, next spring or next autumn, most likely, did he do enough, the Prime Minister, yesterday to win over those votes? We've seen that net zero announcement. That's boosted him a bit in the polls, but he's been a long way behind ever since he's taken over at number 10 Downing Street. Did he do enough?
I think it was the start, which we were all really expecting to hear. What we need to now see how as the autumn statement plays out, and then how the spring statement plays out, hopefully with some tax cuts in the spring statement, getting inflation down, growing the economy, getting the debt down, encouraging more growth in this country, encouraging more businesses to make profits and be successful. That's what you really need in an economy, because that's what pays for all these other tax things that we have in the public sector. And that is where we really need to see the next progress. But getting inflation down is a really, really important start, because as he said yesterday, or the Chancellor said recently, a 5% reduction in inflation is equivalent to 5% off income tax. And that's why it's so important for every household in this country.
Except, of course, that is largely outside of the powers of this government. These are external forces from energy bills and the like. Do you think you've got a chance of keeping your seat in the next election and Rishi Sunak still being Prime Minister and with a majority government?
Well, Julia, the polls have moved in the last few weeks. They're now running at about 10%. When I first stood for election in '92, the polls were at 10% going into the election, and we won that election. So I think, yes, what Rishi Sunak's done yesterday is set the groundwork where we could win that election, and you'll hear a lot more yet of good announcements that actually what the British people want. And I think we've set that. That's a really important start yesterday.
OK, well, we shall wait and see. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Conservative MP Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown.